Welcome, everyone, to our weekly Hana here at First Unitarian Church of Honolulu. As many of you know, I'm TJ. I'm the minister here. My pronouns are he, him, his. And this is just a time to come together. Sometimes we do music. Sometimes we do pub trivia. Sometimes we do all kinds of things. But it's always a special treat when someone affiliated and working for and on behalf of our movement itself, the Unitarian Universalist Association, is able to be with us, especially when they're coming from another time zone. I just want to say a big mahalo to our wonderful guest today, coming to us from the West Coast, Sarah Gibb Millspaugh, who is our Congregational Life staff person. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to say hi and introduce yourself a little bit.
Okay, hello everyone. It is really great to have a chance to visit you, albeit via Zoom. I am based in San Diego, California, although I grew up in a variety of places around the country in the Southeast, the Midwest, the West, and then in Massachusetts for many years of my adult life. So, but we've been in California for 4 years. And I've been on the Pacific Western Regional staff for 4 years. So I would love to just have this chance to get to know you, to get to know what you're excited about with your congregation, what you're interested in the broader UUA. We're on the eve of General Assembly, which is happening this year virtually, which means that workshops are happening at 7 in the morning for me, which means that's 4 in the morning for you. So I don't think we'll be going to that many workshops, but they're all available on demand to watch whenever you want when you have registered. And the rest of GA is hopefully at much more accessible times. So yes, what are you interested in having me know, and what are you interested in knowing?
So before we open the lines, of course, we can always do questions in the chat box. You can also email me questions. I am checking my email. Probably easier to put it in the chat. But first, could you tell everyone, because I know, and I think other people know, what does a Congregational Life staff member do, or how do they liaise, or what is it that that relationship looks like?
Yeah. How many folks remember Jan Christian coming to visit and work with you? Yeah. So when Jan retired last year, I took on the role that she had, which is your primary contact on regional staff. So the way that we do things now, instead of having the Pacific Central District executive, who is kind of a jack of all trades or Jill of all trades, they do everything. We have a whole team of 8 different folks working in all 4 districts in our region. And we are the program staff. We also have administrative staff, events planning, bookkeeping, communication, that. So we're this staff team that is working for all of the congregations in our region, which is about 180, or give or take a few, plus our covenanting communities, which there are more and more of each year. So we work as a team on many things, and each of us has primary contacts where our role is to check in with you. I work with about 30 other congregations this way. And we are there to just check in with you regularly, to be your primary go-to person on the team. And then we all have different specialties in different areas that we consult with all the congregations on. So say if you had this bucket's in transition, this portfolio is in transition, but say if you had a big conflict going on in your congregation a few months ago, you could talk to me about it, and then I would talk to Tandy Rogers, whose specialty is conflict, and she works with the Healthy Congregations team, which helps address conflict in congregations. And the Healthy Congregations team is a group of lay and professional folks who specialize in conflict transformation. I'm actually now inheriting that portfolio from Tandy, because Tandy, for health reasons, is needing to transition into some work where she doesn't travel as much. So she's actually going to work part-time nationally on conflict issues with the UUA in response to the Commission on Institutional Changes report that suggests we develop a conflict response team nationally. But then there are other specialties, like since I have experience working with the Our Whole Lives curriculum, I'm our OWL specialist and help answer questions around OWL and help us organize trainings along with our events coordinator. And I also am the Safe Congregations portfolio holder, which means things around behavior and boundaries and safety, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, in our congregations, and dealing with cases of misconduct and things like that. And so I get to see some of the best in our folks and some of the most difficult situations that bring out the worst in our folks. But all of it as a lifelong UU, as a minister and someone who knew this in advance about human nature. I find this work to be profoundly rewarding and really moving. Especially in this time with COVID, I've been on our national COVID response team for the UUA and have helped develop the resources for congregations on COVID-19. And it's been amazing to see how creative congregations have been and how quickly, under a lot of stress, congregations were able to adapt to a situation where we suddenly realized that our congregations were great potential spreaders of disease if we gathered normally. And so the adaptations that congregations have been making has been very much a part of my work these last few months. And I love that you're having a POW Hana every Tuesday night. I mean, there's just such great things that have come out of this really, really hard situation.
That's great. That's a lot. We are holding you in our thoughts and prayers. Like, that's a huge portfolio that you're talking about right now.
Thank you.
And I know, yeah, we love Jan, and we're so happy for her moving on, but also we're so happy to have you and someone with the amount of your experience. There are a few things that we really enjoy here that we're doing a lot of that I think we can maybe talk about. I mean, you'd like to know some things about us, I think, as much as we like to know things about you. And one of the things I know that we did a lot of work with even before I got here was we were the second congregation to pass the 8th principle and to adopt it. And since then, a lot of, we've had an ongoing ADORE group, a dialogue on race and ethnicity, which some of the conveners are on this call, which then led to an 8th principle task force that handles a lot more of the functional day-to-day ways of implementing the principle, and then also an active social justice council that's guided by this. So I guess one of the questions I'm sure is on some of the minds on this call is, what's been your experience so far with other congregations in this process? And since it looks like you're taking on conflict management, it might be good to chat about. But if you have any questions about that, or also, I mean, my first question is, anyone else who's been doing it or anything like that?
When you say this process, do you mean the 8th principle or anti-racist multicultural transformation?
I think both. We are very close on the 8th principle, but also if other congregations, what kind of work is progressing in developing anti-racist identities is probably the way we'd be looking at it. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the great things that happened this past week was that the Commission on Institutional Change, which is a commission that's been working since summer of 2017 to examine racism and oppression within the UUA and recommend some ways to change. Their report just came out. And when I say the UUA, I don't mean the office I work for. I mean all of us, our association of congregations. Has anybody seen the report yet? I see some heads shaking, but I can't see everybody because I'm
The
spotlighted.
report was emailed. If you are connected to the UUA in any way, you might have gotten something that went to your folder you might not look at all the time. It was emailed out, and there will be a presentation on it at GA. But
Yes.
Maybe tomorrow for my weekly bulletin or my weekly thing for the bulletin, I'll put a link in it for people to take a look at. So.
It's available online right now on the website in HTML for free until the end of the month. And then we had a publishing contract that got delayed because of COVID, but it's going to be coming out in print and going to be mailed one copy to every congregation. And there will also be an ebook available for purchase from the UUA bookstore. And so it's a little hard to read it all just looking at web pages, but I did. You can make your way through it. But one of the things that they recommend is that the UUA really look at all the ways that congregations get the kind of transformational experiences that people really need to be able to live out our anti-oppressive, anti-racist commitments. And one of the things that I have learned in my own anti-racism journey is just the way that white supremacy and white as the norm gets it in our culture. Children as young as 2 are picking up those messages subtly. Nobody has to say anything to them about race for them to pick up these kinds of messages and internalize them. And that's people of all races and cultures. And it might be a different growing up in Hawaii. My husband actually grew up in Hawaii, and he internalized multiculturalism in a different way than in some other places in this country. But I feel like it's something that we have to explicitly work on and have transformational experiences for, because it's so foundational in the way that our thinking and our feeling is formed as we're growing up. I see in the chat, Richard Valasek suggested OWL for racism, how to teach our kids about racism. Yes, and that's one of the things in the Commission on Institutional Change report is recommending, do we do something like OWL for racism? And I co-led a workshop a few years ago at GA with Aisha Hauser and Natalie Fenimore about how to talk to kids about race, because it's so important. And a lot of white parents especially try to put off that conversation or pretend that if they don't talk to their kids, they're not going to become racist. But that's not true. That's just the system that we're in.
And I'll just want to say, maybe offline we could chat, because our young family, Hana, is actively talking about how to talk to their children about racism and developing anti-racist identities.
Oh, yeah.
And are literally looking for other ways. And so finding that talk, and also you literally wrote the book on childhood development formation. So that would be a really...
No, I didn't write it, but, I can point you to some things. Yeah, definitely. Okay. But one of the things is that for a long time, congregations that really wanted to go deep in the past 10 years on anti-racism, multicultural work, were going to groups like Paula Cole Jones's Adore, like you did, or Meadville Lombard. I think it was the Foz Institute at Meadville that came out with Beloved Conversations. These haven't been UUA initiatives. And we've had resources like Building the World We Dream About for adults and young adults, but it's pretty underutilized. So there are just so many things that we can be doing, and I'm really excited. I want to be part of the process of this next phase of how do we respond to the report by creating, and it's not even like a resource, a book, but transformational experiences, because that's what we really need. It's not, even if our minister picks the best words and our religious education director picks the best children's books, that we have to have those things that are going to really change us in our hearts and our minds. to be able to actively live into being anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural.
Great. Yeah, I agree. I also am touched, and moved a lot by the call of the commission to really think more theologically, to get our congregations thinking more theologically. I mean, theologians have been crying out for change long before, they have been the voices of the prophets in the wilderness, many who are embraced by Unitarian Universalism, not just Dr. King, but many others. And to deepen and understand that move theologically seems like another important move. So we canceled our coffee hour on Friday because it would have been meeting at the same time as the presentation on the Commission on Institutional Change, because I've been encouraging everyone to go to that if they can. So
yeah, that makes sense. And I'm curious, theologically, for you, I've been wondering if the experience of people having to make significant changes in their lives with COVID-19 and experiencing how the disease spreads, if really underscored for a lot of people who are not normally thinking about the interconnected web, if that built that understanding, which helped build support for all kinds of people who had never uttered Black Lives Matter before in their lives to do that in the last month. I've really been wondering about that. Do you think that could be connected, that kind of that theological thinking that you use or often used to doing happening on a larger scale?
Well, it's the inverse. And sorry to everyone, we're gonna not to geek out a little bit, but I think that we always think about the interconnected web as how we're going to have positivism, how we're going to positively experience the world and introduce more people, perhaps Unitarian Universalism, almost evangelically. And instead,
here's somebody's car. Could you?
Yeah.
In the car.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And so now we're experiencing the inverse. You're experiencing the inverse, where we're experiencing a bit of the negative and showing how we're all connected. So I think that is, definitely one of the things that people are experiencing. And it did not go unnoticed at all by a church that does as much anti-racism work as we do, that predominantly the essential, if someone said, show me an essential worker, it's a woman of color in America. Like, those are the people who were who were predominantly essential workers, who were going back first to their job, or perhaps not even allowed to have leave. And these kinds of things were extremely, hurtful that we saw, and really laid bare not just the call of Unitarian Universalism that calls us into being in community and in connection with all of the lives around us, but also into the eighth principle of realizing that we need to tear down the systems of oppression that are forming this situation. So
the seventh and the eighth. There we go.
Yeah. So we could talk about this all night, and I'd actually love to. There are other questions that I've gotten, so I don't want to make too an abrupt a shift, but I think we shared some of the stuff we're talking about. But you speaking about transformation also brought up some other thoughts and some other questions that have come. Just as a minister, I hope for transformation in worship. And then worship was transformed overnight in just functionally, into Zoom. And so one of the questions I think a lot of us have is, do you think Unitarian Universalist Association, or just UU churches in general now, are going to always have some kind of online interactive component, or do you think they should, or where is that for you right now, that feeling?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I know there are some things that we're going to want to hold on to, I imagine, like just the increased accessibility for people of all abilities, mental, emotional, job situations. I mean, as long as someone has a computer or a smartphone, and that's not everybody. There is a real sense of increased accessibility. Like I was invited to the reception of the President's Council of the UUA, which is people who are some of the largest donors to the association. And there was somebody who's been on the President's Council for I think 10 or 12 years and hasn't been to GA because of her very significant back problems. And she's going to GA this year. And I mean, that's beautiful and that's wonderful. And I really appreciate that kind of accessibility and the economic accessibility for people who have significant transportation costs to get to the congregation, because the nearest congregation might be 2-3 hours away. There's just, so I think we'll want to hold on to that accessibility and that inclusion. And it is very possible that congregations will want to have some online components continually. For example, many congregations have such a hard time getting parents of young children together in groups. But now that we know we can do this on Zoom after the kids have gone to bed, it makes a big difference.
Yeah. Although I know a lot of parents are struggling with trying to do Zoom for the kids. Like to try to get the kids involved in Zoom has not been a successful enterprise. Because that kind of leads to another question that I think I know the answer to, but as an OWL expert, one question was, is OWL being done by Zoom? My understanding is we don't do OWL by electronically ever, but I just asked,
that is a real sadness and loss that OWL has. Melanie Davis is our whole lives. Basically, she's like our OWL director, but I think her name is coordinator for the UUA. And she and Amy Johnson from the United Church of Christ, they work together to create policy. And they really felt very strongly that it's not appropriate to adapt OWL to be done online. They have come up with a syllabus of recommended books for people to use with their own families during the time of not having OWL available. And if you'd like access to that, send me an email and I can share that with you. But and we had OWL training scheduled, all kinds of things that just aren't happening. It's really unfortunate.
Yeah, it's been hard on folks to see kind of the losses, which kind of brings up that question of, I early on there was such a wrangling to try to fit everything we were doing into this new paradigm. And some of the wise voices in our church said, maybe we need to feel the loss of some of these things. Like we maybe don't get to have everything, and that there's some things that have to be missed. And I've had the spirit, at least with really anything, if can, if no can, no can. Like if you can't do it. I mean, how do you think like that spirit is getting into churches? Are you watching other groups kind of overcorrect and trying to do church all the way it was, or people mourning those losses, or what's been your experience with other
it's some of both. It's some of both. And I've also seen people preparing for workshops at their church that nobody comes to, and things like that. But I mean, that happened to me in person too. Like I'd set up a whole series on this certain book, and one person shows up to the first class. That so that happens in person, but online, I think it takes some time to get a sense of what's enough and what's too much. Like my parents in their 70s who are retired, so they don't have day jobs. They were feeling like they just had too much from the church, because there was this constant, like every day, some chance to be up in front of the Zoom. And so finding the right balance, and also for each person needing to find their own right balance, and to live into that, and to be okay with what I like to call experiential learning. I learned about that from my colleague Karen Bellavance Grace. Just you're experimenting and learning, and you can't really fail, because if you experiment and it doesn't go the way you wanted or thought it might, then you learn. So we have to do a lot of experiment learning as we move into this brave, new, strange way of doing things.
So speaking of this strange new way of, and brave new way of doing things, I wish everyone could go to it. I know you were at it too, but just to share some of the stuff that goes on, we, the UUMA, which is the UU Ministers Association, had their meeting the last 5 days or so. This is for everyone who's on the call. And there were a lot of technical issues. And so GA is coming up tomorrow. And so I'm just letting everyone know. But we had one of the most beautiful services I've ever been to in my life. We did child dedication for the clergy, and no one could hold it together, because for the first time we had these child dedications, and you see everyone in their homes holding their children, and you see all the reactions up close, because normally the service is done, like, most people can't come to it because they have infants, so they don't travel to the UU Ministers Association. So we saw, like, I don't know, what was it, like more than a dozen
I think like 14,
Yeah, 14 child dedications. All of us were bawling. It was just, so I want to say a word that, like, I know there are some big Zoom fans out there and some who are just really not getting it. And I understand, but, like, we're learning how to do, and I just want to get your take on this, Sarah, that, like, I felt like that was a transformative worship experience for me and maybe for that event. Can you say something about the transformational natures that you've kind of seen in some of these things, or some, like, highlights you've seen in this era?
Oh yeah, I mean, that was definitely one of them. And some of the pre-recorded music is incredible, that I've seen, like choirs coming together. And I sang in the GA choir. Do you know if anyone in your congregation sang in the GA choir?
I don't know.
It meant I recorded a video of me going do 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 do, you know, as the background for the song "We Are" by Issei Barnwell. And then they weave together all the pictures of the people individually singing and the instrumentalists individually playing, and turn it into this beautiful mosaic. And I've gotten chills and tears from seeing those. And also sometimes individuals, musicians, singer will play multiple tracks of themselves singing the same song, or multiple things of one playing the piano and then the same person's playing the guitar and they're accompanying themselves. It's that's been really creative and moving. Also, I zoomed in to First Universalist in Minneapolis the Sunday after George Floyd was murdered, and being able to just be present like that. And Susan Frederick Gray was there by Zoom, and Karen Hutt preached this incredibly moving sermon. There was an incredible time for all ages about George Floyd. And I wish I could remember the religious educator's name off the top of my head, but it was incredibly moving and transformational to just be able to be there, you know. And then people who were in different time zones could just go to their own congregation when it was time. There's some kind of a wonderful way of connecting. And I've also seen people get kind of weepy when they see people who moved away from their congregation who are still dear zooming in. I don't know if you've had that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You're getting a buzz. I'm not sure if that's your phone or something, but
no, I don't think so.
Okay. All right. Cool. So now on to a little bit of the future. We're starting GA tomorrow. And actually, I see one. I think our delegates are here, as well as, yeah, they are, as well as a number of other people who are going. So you have all of the delegates from this congregation, including my
Great.
vote. And you have one, two, I think 3 or 4 people I know who are also going, maybe more. So what should we be, do you want to handicap it for us? What should we be looking for?
Oh, you mean handicap in terms of like golf?
Like, yeah. Which,
Oh, yeah.
or horse racing. My family is a horse racing fan.
Right. I'm not a golfer or a horse racer.
Okay.
But I feel like I'm new to GA all over again. Like, I think I've been to 23 or 24 GAs before, but they've all been in person. So I was looking at the schedule today and just saying, wow, this is all new. And the way they're doing things is different. There's going to be a featured speaker each day to help us wrestle with our colonial past and present, and be connected with the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower's landing. How many years has it been since colonial
200.
folks took power in Hawaii? 200? Yeah.
This is, well, not that they took power, that's to get into it, but the landing of Cook was celebrated,
okay.
The 200th anniversary was remembered. Wasn't it last year? I see heads shaking. No, Nan is shaking her head. Nan, do you want to correct me? I'm going to unmute you. Looks like we're having a muting issue.
Okay.
Does someone else want to raise their hand? And
there we go. Man's unmuted.
1779.
Okay.
So an extra 40 years there. But
okay.
1820 is when the missionaries arrived from Park Street in Boston, just around where the UUA used to be.
Well, Park Street Church in Boston was developed as an anti-Unitarian church. They'd still say Trinitarian on their sign. So, yeah. Wow. So, yeah. So we're really wrestling with the history of colonialism and, really the continuance of settler colonialism, which Dina Gilio Whitaker, who is one of the GA speakers, I was in a webinar with her, and it made me realize just here in Southern California, 12 sacred sites per day are being destroyed for development. And so it's not like colonialism was a thing of the past. It's still going on. So we'll be wrestling with that, and I'm really looking forward to learning about this personally. I'm a descendant of some Mayflower people, and also a settler colonialist like everyone who's not native here, but also as an association, because our congregations did grow out of those congregations that the Puritans founded. And we're also going to be having, trying to do plenary, which is now called General Session. And it's a big meeting about the business of the association and reports and things like that. And it's going to be streamlined in some ways that I don't fully understand yet, but we'll have some different groups for chat and discussion during them. The participants will be divided into 5 groups. So they're still going to be really big groups, because we have about 4,000 people registered. And we'll see how all of that works.
Is this too cold for you?
We've never attempted anything like it before, but I'm confident that our tech folks are really going to make it work well. We also have the Where lecture being given by Naomi Klein. How many folks have read her books? I think she's just an amazing person to be talking to us right now, about disaster capitalism, about the Green New Deal and climate change, about how the power of the people. She really has a strong sense of the power of the people to resist oppressive regimes around the world and here. And so that, I believe, will be very inspirational. And the Service of the Living Tradition, the preacher is Danielle DeBona, who identifies as biracial Italian and Wampanoag. Her mother's family was Wampanoag, and she grew up in New England. Wampanoag are the native people who greeted the pilgrims from the Mayflower, but she grew up in a situation where her family just pretended they were Italian, so that they weren't. I mean, that they were 100% Italian. She was half Italian, but she'll probably be sharing some of that story in her sermon. And she's also a chaplain and parish minister. She's retired now, but she's wonderful. So I've known her for a good long time. I really think it'll be a wonderful service.
Yeah, she won, or she received, I forget exactly what the award was last year at GA.
Oh yeah, Distinguished Service Award, I think.
Yeah, I mean, just to let people know that it's like she's preaching, but it's like many consider the backbone of many parts of their own sort of relationship with Unitarian Universalism. Her legacy is enormous in bringing people and sustaining people in this movement. So
yeah. She used to work in our anti-racism office at the UUA doing anti-racism programs. That was when I first met her. So,
wow. I want to also pause and interrupt my own ableist language. I realize I come from a family that knows horses, and we use that word handicap for a very particular purpose. And though that was my intention, any impact that had, I sincerely apologize. I realize saying that it could take someone up short, and I did not mean anything by it, but of course I totally own what I just said. And maybe a better thing would have been to say, can you tell us just more about what is happening instead of trying to sound so cool? So just wanted to say that on the record for everyone. And if anyone wants to talk more about that, I'm 100% available and willing. So, but to go back to, some of the work that is happening at General Assembly, I am curious. I know this is kind of like did we lose Sarah? Let's see. I think we lost Sarah for now. So quick, what does everyone think so far? No, okay. But if anyone wants to, well, I imagine she's going to get back on the line in a second. If anyone has any questions, you can add in the chat box. I'm about to move into more sort of technical, questions, things like to be doing at General Assembly. And then I want to move back into a little bit about what we can do with her in the future. Those are our, where I want to go, just letting people know. So looks like Karen is raising a hand. If you want to unmute yourself, Karen, go ahead.
Be great. I don't necessarily ready for camera because they just worked out, but
good.
Thank you. So this is awesome. Yeah, we were looking at the program today too, and so glad to hear. I mean, that's what I was looking forward to, is the colonial thing, and so I'm particularly glad to hear that. I appreciate what you just said about handicap. That just thank you. Learning so much, and really appreciate that. Was there another question? Shoots.
I didn't have one.
Oh darn. Okay, that was it.
Okay.
It. Really. Oh man, this is gonna be awesome tomorrow.
I think you can still register if you haven't yet, but
there we go. There we go. Oh, can we invite people over for the WHERE lecture?
However you choose to regulate your own social distancing and whatever or do you mean from if you want, are you making an invitation now? Is that what you're asking?
I could, because we have it set up outside.
Okay.
And we just totally cleared space. We can make this a big arena.
Can be lots of distancing.
Okay. So you heard it here first, folks. There's an offer on the table.
Back there.
We cleaned out the.
There's the television.
So with masks and there's a lot of opportunities.
It's all open air.
And I do think the trades are here with us until the middle of next week, from what I understand. So, so consider that if you want to be in touch with Richard and Karen about attending a WARE lecture watch party. That'd be great. I think Sarah's back with us now. I'm gonna fetch her from our, and here we are. No, that's fine.
My internet just went out, and I'm calling you on my my cell phone connection because
there we go.
I even tried to email to say I got kicked out and it didn't go through. So sorry about that.
So we were just talking about, you might have heard, we had some congregants inviting folks over for a WARE lecture watch party at their home. And so that's one of the things we're talking about. But then, because it was going to lead, I wanted to talk really just quickly about if you have any tips for, it sounds like this is your first GA of this variety, like it is for anyone else. But if you have any technical tips we need to know about, or anything the UUA is telling you to tell us about attending GA other than emails and things like that we've been getting, it would be great to hear that.
Okay. I mean, the UUA is not telling me to tell you anything that's different.
Okay,
would
fair.
come out in the emails, but I would just say pace yourself.
Like always.
I think it will be important to try to do the business meetings, especially on a computer rather than a device.
Good
so
point.
that you can type and see things easily. I know when I Zoom on my phone or do video conferencing on my phone, it's really hard to use the chat. So if you think you might want to say anything or get in line to speak, pro or con, or ask a clarifying question or offer an amendment or anything like that, it's especially important to have access to a keyboard. And you might be able to see the information that's provided on the screen better if you have a keyboard and a monitor of some sort or laptop.
All right. That's a very good tip. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll also say don't wake up at 4 a.m. for the workshops.
Yeah.
I guess you'd have to wake up at 3:30 so you watch them at 4, but they'll be available on demand afterward. And some of the time, I'm not sure how we'll do it with this GA, but often at general assemblies that happen in person, we video the workshops, some of them, and then have them online forever on uua.org afterwards. So I think there will probably be a time when they're only available for paid subscribers who went to GA, but then after that, probably a number of them will be available on uua.org in perpetuity.
Great. Well, that's good. And I love your permission to not get up for the 4 o'clock workshops. And I see that Richard's raising his hand in the screen, so I'm going to ask him to unmute and see what his question is.
Do you have any insight into why this GA is so East Coast centric? They don't even put up Hawaiian times. They list all the times except us. Of course, we're only 2 congregations out here.
Yeah, I know.
Is for the benefit of East Coast. They could have shifted it a little bit more, made things a little bit later on the East Coast, and it had been worked out fine for everybody else.
Well, it was going to be on the East Coast, and they did shift a lot of time to what the planning committee and the GA office felt was going to work. But I do feel like 7 a.m. is way too early for workshops. So I think the challenge, if we have to do this again, is to to have some of the key programming just repeat instead of having to try to have it all jammed in at one time that's going to work for everybody, because it is not. And I can't say whether they were thinking of Alaska and Hawaii time, even with that, because it's way too early for Pacific. So, however, we can.
Well, I know they were. Well, I know they were, because though I will allow them to remain nameless, there were there were congregants and lay leaders advocating for a more reasonable consideration of our presence, to which I will not opine about the motivation for the responses we received, which seemed a little bit between the lines, like, you live in Hawaii, give us a break, but that's okay. So,
you
but
don't want to keep the people on the East Coast up till midnight.
That's true. That's fair. So thank you for looking a little bit at GA for us. But one of the things when you got on the call was sort of, I want to hear, you know, or really see if you have any questions for us. Like, is there anything you're wondering? I know you asked kind of the things that are kind of active now, but
I mean,
do you have any other questions?
Where are you finding your most rich experiences of your congregational life right now during this COVID time?
So I would really be speaking out of turn by answering this question in this way, but I'm going to do it anyway. Our congregation has, and I think it's close to 90 people in chalice circles and covenant groups of different kinds. And when COVID happened, many of those groups chose to start meeting weekly in some cases instead of twice monthly. And when things have happened within those communities, there's a lot of support that's happening, and information moves very quickly. The other thing that I thought was really beautiful is that our stewardship team really stepped up to do, because we hadn't even started the pledge drive when this happened. And we try to do our pledge drive sort of coexistent with the budgeting process. And our whole stewardship team was looking at it and decided, we just need to call our people first and just see how they're doing, and set up this amazing shared Google document and called folks and checked on folks who maybe weren't in a chalice circle or we hadn't seen in worship, and just did their own leadership and coordination. And it then morphed into the stewardship campaign, but they felt that they needed to be stewards of the people before they were stewards of the pledge drive, which then ended up being
beautiful.
A very successful pledge drive. And worship, I'd say those are two areas of sort of community life. And then watching our spirits, who are our musicians, our volunteer musicians, and then our paid director of music, along with Stuart Hesh, who's he's become more or less our tech person in many respects, put together like harmonized duets. And there's someone on this call who played a flute and cello duet just themselves. They put it together.
Just like I was talking about. Oh, that's so cool.
The music's been unreal, like some of the experiences. And then recently we've been trying something new where 4 of the different vocalists will sometimes just a cappella sing different verses to a hymn, more as like a solo piece. And that's been extremely moving. But I know that the first time the spirits, I'm getting kind of emotional, but the first time they came together and sang after this all happened was a deeply moving experience for many of us. So, yeah.
Oh,
It's been, those are some areas.
Nodding hands.
Yeah, and if there are others, you can put them in the chat, or I'm gonna go into.
I saw that your sermons. Someone mentioned your sermons have been very powerful. It's
been, may you live in interesting times. The second half of that is so that you can write sermons about it. I'm just kidding. That's not really. But yeah, that's a lot of that. So I don't know. There are other areas that, I mean, and just watching the folks just say things like call me just to say, if you have anyone who just needs me to pick things up, I'll go get them and bring them to them. Like some of our younger families who are running around. So those have been powerful. Yeah. Any other questions for us? How things are going over here?
I mean, what you mentioned being involved in justice work. what particular Hawaiian flavor is there to that work? And in what ways is it similar or the same as the kind of work that folks in the continent, 48 states are doing?
So for us, a lot of it just starts with a door, like getting a door started and having that program, because one of the things that's special about that, among some other things we've been doing, is that at a quarter to a third of the people that attend door meetings don't darken our doorway for worship.
Oh, wow.
They come for a door. And I think that that's a kind of service that is possible through this church. But also, when you ask about in a Hawaiian context, a lot of the Adore presentations are geared toward a Hawaiian context. And also, we do Jubilee every year. And the trainers are getting to know, because they come every year and have grown in their relationship with members here, have learned naturally and organically a lot more of the dynamics of this island and the other islands. And Jubilee has started to take on more of a feeling of how does anti-racist work look in this setting. So those are two ways in the church it's happening. To give you a sense of, so when we went to the uprising, we had a large march on the Saturday after the murder of George Floyd, and there was about 10,000 people gathered in Ala Moana Park.
Wow.
And I don't know how the events went in other places, but for ours, before the organizer of the Black Lives Matter movement was invited onto the stage, the organizers invited a Kanaka Maoli educator onto the stage, and we actually had a Hawaiian language lesson about what these particular words mean and how, and spoke about the groups of people that supported the protectors of the Mauna, and how important it was to be building coalitions and not only having one thing going on at a time. And in a way, it was that someone whose ancestry is tied to this land truly is not a settler invited and sort of paved the way for, and literally then invited the next person in, and in a sense kind of blessed the movement, which many believe was the totally appropriate and very Hawaiian respectful way to go about such an event. So there were many of us who were there, and they could maybe, and someone might be able to say something more, but I think if you're asking like how is the Hawaiian context working in our church and also out in our justice work, those are two ways, or a few ways.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. So we're approaching our hour here, and Sarah is stayed up until 10 after doing all of ministry days as well. So,
I took a break during the day. I took a couple breaks, actually.
So I'm not going to ask her to keep coming up with questions, but we have about 2 minutes if anyone has a quick question. Otherwise, we'll maybe give those last 2 minutes over to the universe and for us all to do something good for ourselves this evening. So I'm not seeing any wild gesticulation, which is what we look for. Oh, do we?
I have one question. No, I have one question. Just has the news about Jonathan Kwong's new position been announced to the congregation?
I don't think it's been announced to the congregation. I did get the email myself.
Well, I can share that your former minister Jonathan Kwong, who's become a wonderful friend and colleague of mine for the past 4 years, has gotten a new position with the UUA. He'll be the Ministerial Development Director. So he'll be working with people who are studying to be Unitarian Universalist ministers and supporting them on their journey from the moment they decide they want to explore it to the time they become ministers. So he's very excited, and I think it'll be a wonderful thing for him, although I will miss him very much on our team.
Yeah. How is, well, never mind. I'm not going to ask that question.
Okay.
But I'll maybe offline. But
we also have a brand new regional lead who
yes,
will get a chance to meet, Carlton Elliott Smith. He just started last Monday. He's been on our Southern United States regional team, and he is moving over to the Pacific West as our lead. And I'm really excited to be working with him.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, what he accomplished where he was last time, he seems to be almost like, sort of like, if there's such a thing, he may have created the position of being a regional development, like, kind of leader.
Yeah, I know, right? Right. Yeah, he's done great things. He also ran for U.S. Congress for a time, so
it's going to be great.
He's wonderful, really wonderful.
Good.
Well, a real pleasure. Thank you for welcoming me into your space, your virtual space. It's really nice to see you all.
We're really looking forward, I'm sure as you are, to the first time you're going to have to come out here and do some kind of work with us. We'd love to see you in person when it's time.
I know. I just can't wait till we have a vaccine and we can see each other in person again. Yeah.
We wish that for everyone. So everyone, please have a wonderful and blessed evening. Thanks so much for coming and being with us. Thanks for all the well wishes. And let's, I wanted to announce before we go that just a reminder, there won't be any coffee hour this Friday. And stay tuned for announcements about Hana. We're still kicking around whether we're going to take a little break or maybe we're going to have musical guests. I'll send out an email to the congregation this week. Okay? All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. And again, Sarah, thanks so much for coming. It was so wonderful to have you.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Be well.
I'm going to end the recording.